Hello. So I'm going to talk about in this video what I just feel like talking about, because there's some stuff I want to get off my chest, and I've had some pretty confirming experiences recently. I've been reading a book by an author called Raven Caldera. I strongly recommend, if you're into the northern shamanic tradition and savor, which I practice in general, get his books. They're probably the best books on the subject out there. But I was reading his book, and this was the Jotun book, which is about the Jotuns, which are the giants in the Norse cosmology. And it's really confirming stuff to me, the information that's in that book. It confirms a lot of my experiences and confirms that, this shit is absolutely real. 100%. These things do exist. Now, giants in folklore and fairy tales, the giant humanoid character, which, in the Jack and the Beanstalk and all that, that is like a parody, like a joke version of what the giants really are. Now, not all the giants are like, super tall and big. Some of them are, can be perceived just as small as a human being. But the reason why they're called giants is because they are like how a giant, walks across the land and he's ignorant to what he, crushes under his foot. That's kind of metaphorically what I'm on about. It's the state of ignorance that they're in. And these Jotuns, they are space, they are time, they are death, they are all the destructive forces within nature. Tidal waves, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, forest fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods. Blizzards, avalanches. They are all caused by Jotuns. They're not those natural disasters themselves, but they are the forces that cause those natural disasters. Because Jotuns are what we call invisible folk. What has been termed as fairy folk, and the Alpha, the elves, and the Duga, the dwarfs, also come under this. And the whites as well, which are just spirits, and elementals. They're all fairy folk, or invisible folk. Now, for all people who are shamanic practitioners, we have the ability to pierce the veil and can see them. But people who don't practice shamanism in any way, they can't perceive them. And I think a lot of people, in the Eddas, which were written by Snorri Sturluson, who's was a Christian monk, he put his Christian dualistic interpretations in there, and kind of casted the Jotuns as kind of like the equivalent of demons. And if you're thinking of terms of like all the Jotuns are just like evil and the Aesir and Vanir gods and the elves are the good guys, then you got it completely all wrong. Norse cosmology, in its original form, the mythos, the lore, is all about, at its core, the human condition. The fact that there is good and evil in every single individual. There's good and evil in me, there's good and evil in you, there's good and evil in every single individual on the planet. And there's good and evil in every single entity that has a certain level of consciousness to make good and evil decisions, moral decisions. So the Jotuns of themselves, yeah, they are both good and evil, just like how humans are both good and evil. Just how like the Aesir and the Vanir are both good and evil. See, we have these aspects to ourselves, and this is why these days I have very much problem of just going around pointing the finger at other people, trying to condemn them for being such bad people, when within myself I have just as much as a potential to do evil than they do, as well as having just as much as a potential to do good than they do. So getting back onto the subject of the Jotuns, the Jotuns are, I would actually say, more complex in many ways than the Aesir and the Vanir, mainly because a lot of the knowledge of them has been lost. A lot of the written knowledge, at least, has been lost. And so we have this very kind of uneducated view of what they are like. And, you know, when I first got into the Norse mythology and stuff like that, I only wanted to have anything to do with the Aesir, the Vanir, and the elves, the Alpha. I didn't want anything to do with the Jotuns. I thought they were this, you know, the baddies, so to speak. But now I've come to realise just how much strong programming that Christianity injected into me as a child. That dualistic, monotheistic programming. And not just from Christianity. You see all the works of fiction out there, wherever they are, in books, comics, films, video games, TV shows, whatever, which always have this like dualistic kind of, here's the heroes, here's the villains, and that's it. And I know you do have, you know, the occasional more grey areas in the various fictions of the different mediums, but they're more of a rarity. What you more see is kind of the the heroes on one side, the villains on the other side, and they always have the stereotypical look to them, usually. And a lot of, I think, probably more that than just Christianity on its own, was a lot to do with the dualistic programming. What goes, and it's not just me. It's, I think, everyone, and probably most people in the world have this idea that this is what they're taught. And the reason why is because the dualistic programming, I wouldn't say it so much simplifies things, but more, trying to look for the word, puts things in a very basic two-dimensional perspective for people. And that's easy to understand for most people. So because looking at things from a more grey area, that's hard to do. That takes a lot of reflection and introspection, and as well as analysis by the side of that. It takes actually a lot of intelligence to think of things in more of the grey area. I'm not talking about intelligence in just the purely left-brained, logical aspect of intellect. I'm talking about intelligence which combines logic and reason, rationality with intuition and seeing the bigger picture. That's intelligence. Because intelligence without wisdom is just intellect, and as far as I'm concerned, intellect is just primitive intelligence, even though in today's society it's prized as being basically a fucking genius, basically. Where I see it, it's no more intelligent than a robot. But so yeah, I'm reading this book, the Jotnar book, and it's a confirmed experiences I've had. This is back in 2010 now, and I might have spoken about this on this channel here, but I don't think I've gone into much detail. I had this vision, what was going on in my head, and it was this entity that was locked in stone. So it looked like a statue, but on the side of a cave, on the side of on a rock kind of wall. And I saw it slowly coming alive. And I didn't know what the fuck this was at the time. But it was going on in my head. All of it. While I was walking along, even like when I was talking to someone, it was going on in my head. And I didn't understand to know what the fuck it was. Then while that was happening, a volcano eruption happened in Iceland. And the smoke from that volcano went up into the air, and even the kind of remains of that even went as far as where I live here in the British Isles. And then this entity which was now more alive. It was of red and gold. It was in this armour, carrying a red flaming sword. It was following me around everywhere. It was usually in a distance though, and it was laughing at me all the time. And this went on for about, how long? For about probably 4 years. On and off. I mean, it wouldn't do it all the time, but it would occasionally just come on and off, and I didn't know what it was. And this wasn't just like, you know, something I just like conjured up in my imagination. No, this thing had a mind of its own. It had its own intelligence in a way. And it got to the point where I battled it. I went outside with my staff. And at the time, you know, I was training with the staff because that was like one of my first practices with my initiation into the saber, the shamanic art, which I practice. And I was spinning my staff around while dancing at the same time. And I battled this entity. And it had this like flaming sword, like the Balrog in the Lord of the Rings, you know, the demon in the Mines of Moria, which Gandalf battles on the bridge. It had this flaming sword. It had gold and red armor. It was pretty fucking tall and big. And it had this red kind of like cloak, like this red robe, but like more of like a cape, if you will. It was ripped, and it was like fiery, and it had a cobra head, like a snake dragon type head, but it was more like a helmet than its actual like face. And I battled it and everything, and this battle went on for days, and then I saw it. Then after the battle and everything, after I had, you know, won the battle supposedly, it went into this. It looked the same, but the colours changed on it, and it went from a more dark red to a rusty blackish grey, and then slowly disappeared. Now, this was really before I knew a lot about the Norse myths, the Norse mythos. And when I started researching more into the Norse mythos, which was kind of around 2014, I think, so it wasn't actually that long after this experience happened, I came across this Jotun, a fire Jotun called Surtr. And and in the Norse mythos and the cosmology, it is the first entity in existence, which self-created itself. And this was identical to the entity that I, you know, was following me around and I battled in the end for about 4 years. And in the Jotun book I'm reading now, it talks about this entity and the experiences, and the exact same behaviour this entity had was just described in that book. Of course I knew what the entity was before I'd been reading this Jotun book, and when I first, you know, discovered this entity, I I couldn't believe it. So, and this really confirmed to me that all of this shit is real. This is not just, you know, what someone made up some time long ago. Like this is all this stuff in this mythology is real, and so I'm reading all this information in this book at the moment, and it's going on about all these different forms of Jotuns. There's the fire Jotuns, the frost Jotuns. Fire Jotuns live in Muspelheim, the frost Jotuns live in Niflheim. There's the sea Jotuns, which live in the oceans, not just on Midgard, but also in the oceans in the Nine Worlds. There's the mountain or stone giants, which live in more in Jotunheim. There's the earth giants. There's also the iron wood giants, which is quite an interesting one, because the oceans of the iron wood are actually responsible for causing deformities within human beings. Because in the Ocean Book it says that if someone has Jotun blood, and what this means is that it's not that your mother or father had, you know, physical sex of a Jotun and you came out that way. And what it means is that Jotuns can possess females who are pregnant, and by doing this then causes Jotun blood in a human being. And this explains a lot of so-called personality disorders, which people just happen to be born with. Antisocial personality disorders. I mean, this could even explain psychopathology in some ways. The ironwood ones, they apparently cause deformities, physical deformities in human beings. And I've always wondered where that came from. Like, why would someone be deformed? Never made much sense to me. Like, why does someone even deserve that? And these people who might be deformed come from a line of people who were completely normal in fact they didn't have deformities. So that was a big question mark for me. And then you have fire. If you're, get possessed by a fire Jotun, for example, if you're fire Jotun blood, you're more of an extrovert type, but also could be antisocial or unsocial. Well, actually not unsocial, but maybe antisocial. Then if you're a frost Jotun blooded type, then you're more introverted and antisocial. And there's a lot of other ones as well, which produce these personality types. And because you wonder where the stuff like psychopathology, which people are born with, and even stuff like autism, which people are also born with and come from. Where do these personality, traits come from? And that's always what I've wondered. These quite severe personality traits, not just a more a more individualistic personality traits that we all have, but like these very kind of like almost what they class as mental disabilities or disorders. So this all really interested me in reading this book, and it also talks about the Ruka, which are a pantheon. So you have the Aesir, the Vanir, and you have the Ruka. And the Ruka are kind of like, it contains Loki, Hela, Jormungandr, Fenris. They're called the Shadow Gods or the Twilight Gods. And if you're from a more dualistic perspective, you just see them as the evil gods or something. The fact is that I've been having contact with these gods, not just recently, but throughout my initiations. Loki, I think, is a very misunderstood archetype. Most people think that Loki is this devil figure, that he's the bad guy. But do you know actually what Loki really is? Yes, he's the trickster. But he's also the light cast onto the shadow. He's the light that exposes the shadow. He comes into your life and exposes your shadow. And you have nothing but to fucking look at your shadow and to face it. He helps you face your shadow. Winds you up, causes all sorts of mischief, so that you just fucking observe your shadow. That's what Loki is. It's an interesting story about Loki. So, Loki. It's the myth of Loki and Balder. Something you might have heard the story before. But I'm just going to tell you, basically, the story goes. So, there's the archetype of Balder, or the god Balder, whatever you want to see it as, who is like the god of beauty and purity. And everything in existence loves Balder, except Loki. So, Balder's mother, Frigga, loves her son, and she's so afraid of any harm coming to him. She goes around the 9 worlds and makes sure that no one harms Balder. However, Loki tricks Hodor, who is blind, into throwing a mistletoe at Balder, which kills him. Now, Hodor gets blamed for this, and all the entities in the 9 worlds weep when Balder dies, because he represents the purity of the sun, the light, the pure light, which when that's gone, the world falls into a more darker place. But eventually they find out that Loki was the real culprit behind Balder's death. And to cut it short, because you can go and read the myth for yourself, I'm not going to get into all the details and everything. But when Loki is confronted by the Aesir and the Vanir, and they tell him, they said tell him we've had enough of your mischief and everything. Loki starts pointing out all the exposing the shadow of every single one of the Aesir and all their faults and all their wrongdoings they have done. He exposes each one of their shadow. And tells them all their fucking filthy secrets they've been keeping. Because they've all just projected all their own shadow onto Loki, but he hits them fucking back. Hits them right fucking back. And this is what I was just saying earlier on this talk, that we all have good and evil, light and dark in all of us. And there's no way of fucking escaping that. So maybe the moral of the story is that when you're, thinking that someone else is, such a bad person, that maybe you might not be that good yourself. So basically, the Aesir all start triggering out, and they tie him to a rock and make this snake drop venom on him for eternity. And this kind of also shows how the individualist, that when he's pointing out the faults of a collective, how he or she is then absolutely punished for just pointing out truth. I mean, it's gone on throughout history. Individuals who've spoken truth against the collective have faced absolute torture and death. Ostracization at fucking best. And this is why collective regimes have, taken over completely, because there's not very many people who want to fucking go up to a collective and start, exposing every individual in that collective's shadow and exposing the collective's shadow in general. Because then, their life can be fucking destroyed. So Loki is really the light that exposes the shadow. That's why he is the fire god. When you stand in front of a fire at night, you see your shadow right there. So also amongst the Rukka is Jormungandr, which is like the Ouroboros in the Greek tradition. Only Jormungandr doesn't just represent cycles and regeneration and shedding off the skin, so to speak. He also represents fear. fear. And how you overcome it by shedding off that skin. No, it's very interesting. I was up in Wales some days ago, or I think last week or something, and I had an experience of, I was out on the beach. Actually, it's a beautiful beach. I was climbing some of the rocks there, and swimming in the sea, and doing a bit of surfing as well. And I was walking back from the beach, back to the car park, and then a wasp fucking stings me in the arm. Now, when I was about 11, 12, I had this traumatic experience where a wasp stung me in the eye. That's the reason why one of my eyebrow muscles can move, but the other one can't. You can't really see it on the screen here, but if you have ever seen me in real life, you would understand. You would be able to see it. So anyway, this wasp stings me on the arm, and it's painful, but it's not as painful as I experienced it when I was younger. And it kind of realised that this pain is like, it's painful, but it's more of just an annoying pain. Like, I'd rather just not really have this, rather than me absolutely in agony, like me having to be fucking, traumatised by it. But I was when I was 11 and 12, and this actually made me have a, really intense fear of wasps. And now my fear of wasps isn't so much there. I mean, I don't want to be around them particularly. When they come over while I'm sitting down, I'd like to just move away, because I don't really want to be around them. I don't think anyone particularly likes wasps, to be honest, but, I had quite an intense fear, like, growing up from wasps from that experience, and now that one's actually stung me, it's realised, again, like just a few days ago, it can't get to me anymore. One of my fears has been shedded off. Now, it was very interesting that I was by a sea. Where does Jormungandr live? In the sea. In the depths of the oceans. So Jormungandr was probably pushing me in a certain situation, and allowed that to happen, allowed me to face my fear. It's not my only fear, I have other fears as well, but I'm not going to get into, but I think everyone has things they fear. So another incident, well, not another incident, I'm going to go to where. Another rucker I'm going to talk about is Fenris. Fenris is chaos. Last winter, I had a battle with Fenris out in the freezing cold night. I was in my shamanic robes, shamanic cloak, wearing my shamanic cloak with my basically shamanic gear on. I mean, I only put it on not very often, for certain rituals and stuff I put it on. And I went outside with my staff, and I said to Fenris, come on then, because he was asking for it. But he came out, and he had this, we battled, and, it was quite a intense experience. And he said to me, after I got him down and everything, he said to me, chain me up. I don't care, I'll get out again. And I said to him, no, this time I'm fucking putting you down. And I got my staff and I stabbed it right through his fucking skull, right through his fucking jaw. The fact is, I don't think it killed him because Fenris can't die. He's a cosmic essence of the universe that is chaos. He's chaos. And chaos is a part of nature and part of reality, but I think it was symbolic. It was symbolic that I now understand how to have order within. Order. In a way, to accept that there is chaos and it's not going to go away, but for me to be the order within the chaos. It's very interesting. I suppose a lot of you probably on here have seen the film The Dark Knight, the Batman film with Christopher Nolan directed, and Heath Ledger as the Joker. Now, Heath Ledger's Joker character in that film is the Fenris archetype. See, in the comic books, he's more the Loki archetype. He's the trickster. He's the, he winds Batman up. He do make basically Batman look at his own shadow and look at his own dark side. But in the Dark Knight film, they've changed his archetype slightly to more Fenris, the chaos. And you can see this, that chaos isn't necessarily logical. Chaos just wants to watch the world burn. And you have people in this world who simply just want to watch the world burn. They're so destructive. They have no inner order within themselves. They don't care if they die because of it. They just want to see the world burn around them. At one time, I was in my early 20s, I went through a phase of that. There was one time in my early 20s when I hated the world so fucking much, I just wanted to see all it burn. I wanted to see society just go into complete chaos. I didn't care anymore. I was at a stage in my life where I was just this angry young man who thought, fuck it. I have nothing left to lose. I just want to see everything fucking collapse around me. That was fucking Fenris possessing me. Now I put him fucking back in order. He knows he can't possess me anymore. He knows he can't take control of me anymore and to turn me into a chaotic madman. But you can see this in, these anarcho-communist, Antifa types who just go around on the streets and just, cause as much chaos as possible. That's Fenris' fucking army on the streets. And there's the, you know, if you read the mythos, there's, you know, Tyr, who binds Fenris, but also loves Fenris. And you could see Tyr, the army of Tyr, as the army of the more, you know, authoritarian right wing, because the, you know, the right wing is all about hierarchy, and that's a very Aesir concept, hierarchy and order. And so the, you know, the foot soldiers of the authoritarian right wing are the army of Tyr. And we're seeing this now. I mean, it's kind of more less in the country I'm in. It still does happen, but it's not as, like, especially in America. You know, I don't watch some watch much of it because it kind of makes me kind of depressed. But I see, you know, YouTube videos of people on the ground and, you know, these riots on the streets in America. I don't know if it's so prevalent at the moment, but you see these Antifa types, these more authoritarian, conservative types just battling each other on the streets, and that's at the moment, that's the mythology being acted out in the collective unconscious. Tyr trying to bind Fenris. Because remember, as the stuff is going on within us individually, there's also the collective unconscious, which is uprising, and people who don't know about the, you know, the stuff like I do, or people watch my channel, they're just completely possessed and taken over by it. Whereas me, people watch this channel, we're aware of it. So we're aware of these archetypes, and we allow these archetypes to flow through us, but we can control them. The masses fucking can't. They just get fucking taken over. So the other one, the other Ruka I've been in contact with is Hela. Now this is more of like something very recently. I was in watch, you know, I don't usually watch TV because I think it's a load of crap, but, you know, I was in there with my, you know, on the, you know, sitting down with my partner, and the lights are out, so, and that's just the TV was on, and I wasn't really watching it, I was just sitting there, you know, and out the corner of my eye, I see this figure which kind of looks a bit like a ghost. But it was like constantly changing from having human like skin and flesh to this basically just being a skeleton, and like kind of like if you can see it moving back and forth from that to that, like, but it was kind of like this very etherical look to it at the same time, with like long hair and wearing some sort of like robe, and that was Hela. And then, you know, this morning I went to the bathroom and there was a swarm of flies in there. I sprayed them all because you know, I don't really like to kill you know, living things, but, you know, there's some living things that if they come into, you know, my house, flies, wasps, mosquitoes especially, I just fucking kill them, because personally there were just so many of them anyway. If there was one in there, then I wouldn't mind, but if there's a fucking swarm in there. And well, I was reading in the Jotnar book that when Hela's in communion with you, lots of insects start appearing. You'll notice this, especially flies, because what do flies? Flies feed off the dead. And one of Hela's a force of Hela, so to speak. So you know, that wasn't, you know, that means she's around. And also another thing is that I've been looking into my, you know, family tree and my ancestors and stuff like that, and that's also something of Hela, because she contains all the records to everyone's bloodline of ancestors. So if you go and ask her, she can help you find more information about your ancestors and stuff. Now, first you've got to earn her respect, because she doesn't like really, she likes to stay in her, you know, she doesn't like to be disturbed so much. So, and I wouldn't recommend this someone who's just first going into initiations, into, you know, contacting Hela, because there's something awfully quite cold and just straightforward about her. She'll just tell you the fucking truth. No matter how cold or dark it is. But she represents death. And death doesn't just mean physical death, it means death in spiritually or psychologically, the death of something. So even I'm quite wary about coming into contact with her. But I've been reading more about, you know, and it's not like I've never met her before. I was, you know, I've been to Helheim before, and I have these stories written down in my journal, but I'm not going to go through them now. My experiences, basically. So, yeah, I mean, that's another one. But the Rukka are I wouldn't recommend working with the Rukka first. Or coming into contact with them first. I think if you're new to this, more try and make contact with the Aesir and the Vanir first. Because the Rukka will, you know, are very intense to come into contact with. And, you know, if you don't like seeing things that are what we would call stereotypically negative, then you need to be kind of desensitized first, I think. You know, because I've had, you know, dreams of fucking terrifying. If I told you of the dreams I've had, there's dreams I've had what are like a fucking horror movie. I'll actually tell you this dream I had last night. So yeah, I was at this town centre, which is just a town down my, you know, down a few miles from where I live. And I was there for some reason in my dream. And this like guy walks up to me and he has a fucking, like, metal in his head. He looks like some fucking Frankenstein monster. So you kind of got to imagine the kind of, like, quite, you could say, stereotypically thuggish looking guy. But he has, like, metal pipes coming in and out of his fucking head. And he's trying to, you know, start a fight with me or whatever. Because I'm waiting for this bus in the stream, and I get on the bus, and I can't really remember what else will happen. But anyway, yeah, that is like pretty, you know, mild. That's like some of the dreams I've had make that look like rainbows and fucking unicorns. Because when you start like practicing shamanism, certain things fucking come to you in your dreams. And they really, really go out of your way to basically try and get as much fear out of you as possible. Now there's been dreams where, you know, I've been locked in a fucking dark room while some really sinister voice is laughing and I can't see shit. I remember that one. Fucking hell. And it felt real as well. It wasn't just like a, you know, a bit of a... It's almost like I was lucid dreaming. You know, it was, you know, terrifying. But it's necessary for when you go through shamanic initiations, you're going to have fucking dreams like this. You're going to have fucking, you know, experience, you know, terrifying stuff. It's actually quite interesting. Sometimes I don't watch a lot of horror films these days because they activate certain archetypal forces and bring them to the forefront. More like they invoke... Watching a horror film can invoke certain certain archetypal forces into my dreams. And this has happened every single time I watch a horror film. So I have to like cope with, you know, then getting, you know, something in my dream attacking me or whatever. You know, of course, I'm used to this stuff now. I mean, I've had sleep paralysis with, like, there's one, you know, I think probably the most terrifying one I had was when I woke up and I saw a, like, girl standing next to me, like, with, like, short, gingerish hair, like a, and she turned her head around like an owl, slowly, and with, like, her eyes completely intensely opened at the same time, and I was in sleep paralysis. And yeah, that was, you know, I was just like sweating in fear at that time. Anyway, maybe changes something, the subject on something a bit more lighter. So yeah, like I was saying, the Aesir gods. I mean, I'm going to put this into a video actually, listing out the main archetypes of the Aesir, the Vanir, and the Rook I work with. But the Aesir gods, just to give you what they are very much more about hierarchy and order, and are very of a patriarchal nature. And this is why a lot of the, you know, you see these far right, nationalist groups use a lot of Aesir symbolism in their in what they put out, because it attracts that kind of like people who like hierarchy and like order and like patriarchal concepts, and that does attract a lot of people on the political far right. But that's not to say that it's it's like it's all bad or anything. That's just because that's what that's what they archetypally represent. But at their core, they represent divine masculine virtues. I mean, they're simplified as sky gods. So, and what comes from the Proto-Indo-European sky father, which we look to the fucking sky for answers. I mean, the Jehovah God in Christianity is just this kind of more inversion of the Indo-European sky gods. I mean, that's what really it is. And they completely done away with the Earth goddess, which is more the Vanir. It's more the Earth goddess. The Vanir are more matriarchal. They're more about community and working with nature in terms of agricultural society. And so you would find that basically Aesir types are more into the grandiose kind of civilized society that brings awe and has a sense of greatness, achievements, like a lot like when you walk around a lot of these iconic cities, you see grand architecture, you see a maybe not so much anymore, but once upon a time a great civilization. That's what the Aesir are about. They're about building a great civilization that's going to be remembered for all of time. Whereas the Vanir are more about just being out more on the countryside, being more communitarian, about the community, and building just a simple agricultural setting, and not trying to be great or be like reach the stars or anything. They're just quite more down to earth, more that kind of thing. Then you have the Ruka, which are more the twilight, the shadow gods, and they really are a more individualistic. It's more about what's good for the individual. So it's more about a individual going out into the wilderness and living on his own, and almost rejecting society, rejecting social norms, rejecting that way of the so much collective way of life, and moving more into an individualistic, way of life, which is away from civilization or even away from community in general, and going out into the wilderness and going out into, and if you're in a shamanic path, that this is something you have to eventually do, because you have to spend time alone, spend time reflecting, looking into your shadow, deep into your shadow. So it's not really that's what really the three pantheons in the cosmology are. They're three almost ways of life which you can take. And maybe we need to go all through. I've been through all three of them, and I'll have to probably go through three of them again, because I'm just like starting to learn. I don't know everything about the cosmology as a whole, because I've got a lot more to learn about it, and I'm just saying my thoughts on here really, from my own experiences and from what I've the knowledge that I've read, and even from other people's experiences. And I kind of want to do a lot more on this, because I think there's so much to get into with this. It's a huge subject within itself. It's a huge just body of knowledge that is like never ending. So I'm going to leave it here for now, because I've been talking for quite a while, and I'll speak to you next time.